Good afternoon. This is Ben Yarbrough with Calyptix Security. And today I'm very excited to bring to you our founder, Lawrence Teo, and a recent addition to our team, India Thomas, the cyber threat analyst and incident response. We're going to walk through the Community Shield and how we were able to update your units, your access enforcer, extract threat intel from the systems, and put that back into the Community Shield and what that is doing for your sites. So we're real excited to bring this. The team's worked really hard to make that technically happen. Obviously, the Log4j situation came out of nowhere, no surprise, and required fast response. And Lawrence will update you guys on what we were able to do there. But Lawrence, say hello from the depths of development.
Hi, yeah, this is Lawrence. I'm glad to have all of you here with us.
And India is in the office today as well.
Hello, this is India. Thank you for joining us.
So here's a quick agenda, revisit our why, and then sort of a quick overview of the Community Shield and how it works. Then we're going to hit Log4j, what we did and some things we learned, things we need to do going forward, how that will inform our roadmap. We're going to look at some dashboards. We're going to look at the one we made public, both around Log4j and broader. We're going to talk a little bit about the update on the notifications for malicious traffic, and then touch base on our near-term and longer-term roadmap. As always, we welcome suggestions, feedback, and Q&A. So on the business side, 22 is a big year for us. We are announcing a whole host of incremental service offerings around what we do for you guys as partners and customers in providing comprehensive network security. So we want to highlight these things, make sure you know that you do have now the ability to use Gatekeeper as zero trust network access, particularly for RDP or other access methods, SSH, or even systems over HTTPS. And you can use 5 users free, no charge. We've had a whole host of partners sample it, use it on their NFR, use it at 1 or 2 sites. And we hope that growth will continue. The reason we did make it free was because we think it needs to be used given what's going on in the environment. Additionally, we added access to the event vault and the connection monitor to address both short-term live connection logging and event vaults for 365-day logging. We've got the Community Shield we've added, dynamic DNS, and of course, external threat feeds. We've layered that all on top of new hardware, and we've got a great upgrade offer on the AE800, so you guys can move to the 900. And the reason we want you to do that is because these systems really, it's time to upgrade the hardware. You'll see the amount of memory and the processing power of these new units is substantially increased, as well as the speed. I'd point out that 1800 has 2 SFP slots. So if you want to go fiber, you can add your modules, and it's really a tremendous value for those units in terms of speed and performance. These are all desktops. Again, we have inventory availability for these. The AE800 is available for the R in a refurbed unit. We recognize that's needed for really small sites, but we really do encourage you to upgrade. There is pricing in the portal, and you could talk with your sales account manager as well. So that's all on the business side. We're going to really focus on the technical. Lawrence, just to revisit our getting started, just remind you of a few years way back when.
Yeah, so like long ago, well, I gotta do some math here. That's what, 16 years ago. I finished my PhD at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, where I basically theorized an internet scale information sharing network and got a patent for it. And this was the basis of many things that we do here at Calyptix, is to fulfill that grand vision of basically rapid internet scale information sharing to counter the threats. Because I mean, just like this Log4j thing, it was so prevalent, it was everywhere. Back then, way back then, we had similar things too. Like, I'm not sure if anyone remembers, like SQL Slammer, for example, which was a worm that propagated throughout the entire internet in just 20 minutes. I mean, it was pretty crazy. Part of that was the motivation for my research, is to basically build secure, robust systems to protect businesses and organizations, and to respond to rapid emerging threats as quickly as we can.
So that really is our why. So when you look at what we've done, and Lawrence and his leadership of the team, it's been a journey. We've kept our head down since 2005, building a platform for small businesses. We acquired the intellectual property from the university. We've grown the team, gotten customers. We had a lot of friends in Charlotte that helped us get started. And meanwhile, the government's building out infrastructure, protocols, legal, and all these other processes to share information. And our belief is that for small businesses, we just had to build the tool. In the last 18 months, we've really seen a coming of age in information sharing and the threats small business face. I'd like to highlight most recently the introduction of Gatekeeper as a two-factor network access tool for zero trust to really implement that level of security on a session-by-session basis. And then the introduction of the Community Shield, the automated sharing of information, which now today boasts 7 organic feeds, 15 external feeds, close to 30,000 IP addresses. That's not a marketing number, that goes up and down. And we've also added the notifications. So as you can see, it's been a journey, and we've had a lot of partners, a lot of customers that have stuck with us, that understand that we're not a me too, that we're building an entirely different approach to network security for small business. So when you peel back the onion and you look at what we do, don't say it's just a firewall, because it's not. We all know everybody's trying to tell you a firewall's not enough, and it's not. And it's when you look at your access enforcer, step back and really understand how much it's bringing to you. So this is just to revisit the challenges that even the folks at the highest level have in terms of malicious infrastructure being used in the US and the need to drive zero trust. So these threats are escalating, and this was just some data a little while back on failed logins that showed that the rapid increase from period to period. They're out there trying to find your systems, and they're trying to get in whatever way they can. And so that kind of transitions to Community Shield. And I think most folks know that what we're trying to do is empower small businesses to share actionable intel, to increase defense, to protect your systems, detect when they might be breached, and prevent and mitigate any damage that might occur. So how do we do this? What's it all about? Well, we identify the inbound threats through various ways, and we share those IPs with all the sites. So that stops both the inbound traffic and the outbound traffic. And so the goal is to accelerate detection, prevention, and mitigation, reduce the noise. So inbound Community Shield alerts, in our opinion, are just noise. And in fact, we've done some learning as we've started to drop traffic from some of the scanners and things like that. We are trying to be efficient, and the Community Shield, by blocking stuff at the network layer, provides reduced system overhead. So your IDS, IPS doesn't have to check traffic that really shouldn't be coming. We want to preserve your budgets. We want to share. We really do have a gap in cyber. And by sharing information actionably, we can get the most for the least. Added this last bullet point, provide rapid response and protection to defend newly discovered threats and vulnerabilities. And that's really what we did with Log4j. In terms of the date and the timeline that was introduced, I believe it was the 11th. We'll get into the details on what we responded. But the need to respond to this issue was pressing. It was sudden. It was urgent. It was all important, critical, and it's going to continue. It's not a one-time deal. When you think about what the objectives of the defenders are, it's really to find a way to thwart the bad guys at whatever stage we can. You know, if we can stop them from finding your open ports, that prevents reconnaissance. That prevents attacks, brute force attacks. If we can stop them from downloading the malicious payload when you've gone to a bad website or open an email, then we can prevent that delivery or exploitation. Or maybe they're beaconing out, command and control. If we can stop that outbound connection, that again is a way to thwart the bad guys. And lastly, if we can prevent them from extracting your data or encrypting it, that's another point. But we need to take advantage of trying to stop them at any one of these points, realizing that it's not a firewall anymore. It's far greater than that. And so we're looking to leverage the process in an orderly way with the limited resources at hand. So there's another way to look at the threats, and that's through a concept called the diamond threat model. It's very simple. It takes the concept of the adversary, connects them with their infrastructure that they're using to deliver their capabilities to the victim. And when you think of infrastructure, that's an IP address, it's a domain name, it's that type of system that's used to reach the victim. And we believe that by identifying that infrastructure, that we can thwart those efforts and certainly make them more costly. And this shows here Community Shield in action recently. Since August, when we started really rolling it out, it shows the number of active IPs that were detected by Community Shield and the number of events across our fleet. So you'll see pretty quickly that spiked in October. Lawrence, I think that's when we were recording a lot of the known scanners and all of those events, and quickly realized we had to drop those instead of record that data. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think I recall it was something along those lines. This actually feels like a lifetime ago. So, yeah, but yes, something along those lines, yes.
And so there's an ebb and flow here, but I think you'll see the general trend is pretty consistent, and both in terms of the infrastructure that's being used and identified, as well as the volume of activity. And when you look at sort of the Community Shield in action in terms of the most active, we have a feed for suspicious IPs. It generates a lot. And then the RDP probes, which is the nemesis of small business, is that secure remote access. There's a huge volume of activity that comes from the infrastructure that's trying to take advantage of RDP. Log4j just starting to creep in there in the failed logins and the recon IPs. It's important to note that each of these feeds is the manner in which we identify the IP. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of what the data really means. But an RDP probe is identified as an IP address that's trying to engage in RDP traffic that it shouldn't. And the recon might be an Nmap scan or so forth. Failed logins, pretty obvious. And so then when you look at this in a specific instance, I pulled this data really quite recently this morning to look at the impact on failed logins across our sites. So what we did was we looked at the number of units operating at the different versions, 4.0, 5.0, which introduced Geo Fence, and 5.03, which introduced Community Shield. And we calculated for the last 60 days, based on the version, what percentage of sites were getting hit with failed logins. So version 4, about 25%. Version 5 with Geo Fence dropped that down to 12%. And with Community Shield, on average, we're dropping that down to about 7%. Now, not everybody's using every feature, and some of those logins are benign. So this is not intended to be, precise nanogrammed data here, but just general trend, right? And both the incidents, the number of sites is cut by almost 75% from version 4. And then the actual occurrence of the events is dropped from, on average, 563 to 14. So you take those brute force attacks that go on just with abandon. And during this period, there were some real spikes. I recall India analyzing a couple days where there was an SSH campaign that took the data off the charts. But by and large, you'll see these tools that we're providing make a difference. They make a big difference. Lawrence, any thoughts as you look at this? You haven't seen this data, so I know I'm catching you off guard. But when you compare version 4 to what we offer today, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, basically it just shows the effectiveness of Community Shield. Like what we find is when the attacker, cannot probe your, I mean, in this case, failed logins, if they cannot attempt a login, then they're not, I mean, if they try again, they still can't get through, then it does not make sense for them to keep trying, so they just move on. So then they leave your site alone. So, and it also shows the effectiveness of multiple layers of defense. Like basically, when you add Geo Fence, you cut out multiple countries that your business does not do business with. So that cuts out a whole bunch of attacks from those threat actors. And so basically, it shows the effectiveness of reducing your attack surface, and you do that by using Geo Fence, Community Shield, and other measures that you can take.
No, I think it's to me, I was really pleased to see the success there, and both the incidents, number of sites, as well as the volume of activity. And so look to keep an eye on this and keep driving it forward. So when we talk about the theory and compare it to the current implementation, guys, walk me through this process that y'all are doing to create these feeds. India, you want to jump in on this? I know you spend a lot of time looking at the different ones, and so when you create a recipe for a threat feed, it's not a one-time thing, it's an iterative process. But what's an example like with the failed logins?
So with the failed logins, I try to create a recipe that looks for IPs that have had failed login attempts with the Access Enforcer GUI and SSH and Gatekeeper, and we try to exclude known good IPs and internal IPs. But after we get those and see that they meet a certain threshold, we deploy them out to all of the access enforcers, and then from there, whenever those IPs try to reach those access enforcers, they're blocked and they can't attempt to log in anymore.
And we did have one false positive, I recall. We had a client, it wasn't a failed login feed, but they we took data, and we were taking data for suspicious US addresses, and we inadvertently put that client's sites on the feed, and so we did have to tune the feed to really understand where it's coming from, which we did, and we were able to roll that out pretty quickly. But what the interesting thing to me is, and I would invite you guys as the users, the admins, the partners, when you're seeing stuff hit these sites and you're looking like, man, that's just creating noise or it's a problem, let us know what it is. These recipes are not rocket science. I don't mean to take the fun out of it, but it's sort of like, if you were looking for a red pickup truck with license tag XYZ, that's what we need to look for. And we got to take appropriate measures. And if you're seeing that and it's a threat to your site or making noise, let us know, because I know that Eric Keene down in Florida, I mean, he hated these brute force attacks. Just create a lot of noise. They create a lot of anxiety. And so if we can stop one at one site and then stop it everywhere, that sure is a lot better. I mean, it's, then he's got to go find another IP to burn. So Lawrence, you have anything else on this? What to me is interesting is when I look at your theory, the stack on the bottom, that's an access enforcer, right? I mean, it's not perfect, but basically it's a platform that has a collection sensor on it. We update the software. We have a response engine, in terms of the Community Shield. We've got, connect and pulling the data off. looking at the logs. We're then, if you take into account the Log4j, that triggered, we'll talk more specific, but I'm not going to say this is exactly what you had, but there's some definite parallels. Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Like this was, like, of course, like, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. So in this case, I mean, even though this was theory, but a lot of the implementation of what we did is based on what I wrote. Like, for example, I theorized that we need like a really, really reliable and secure device for every organization. Because when you're sharing intel like this, you want to make sure intel is not tampered with also. So that's like, part of the reasons why we use OpenBSD and secure coding techniques and so forth. So yeah, so a lot of the theory did get implemented in practice. It's just not always in the way I theorized it back then, but I think it is. But frankly, a commercial practical implementation that works is definitely preferred over a theoretical concept. So.
No, it's definitely harder to get it done than theorize about it. There's no question about that. The interesting, so one piece of this is that you'll notice the node. So in our implementation, the access enforcer is a node, and currently we operate as a total collective, and we do more of a hub and spoke updates. But it's in long term, we're still looking for the Napster of firewalls, if you will, the peer-to-peer that can be fast and be efficient and share that data without dependency of the hub and spoke. But it's continuing to refine that process, make it secure and get it right and share the right data. An interesting aspect is we'll bring up later, but in terms of, you mentioned the data, not tampering the data, that is an important aspect. And we think one of the strengths that we bring to the table is that the organic data that we know and generate from our community has the highest value for us. Would you agree, Lawrence?
Yeah, definitely. Like, because like in the threat intel world, there's a saying that goes, your collection is not my collection. Basically, even the big guys, they have their own collection of feeds and intel and so forth, but it's they only have it, the ones that are targeted at them, and it's not necessarily the same as what we see. So basically, every single party is like looking at just a part of the puzzle. So it's still important to have one that we see for ourselves, for our own community of SMBs. I think there are some unique threats that are targeted at the SMBs that are not necessarily targeted at the large enterprises. Yeah, so that's why there's definitely great value in doing what we're doing.
I would agree. I think this shows, again, the organic feeds. And one highlight I wanted to note was that the international super scanners, that's traffic that we're dropping. So you won't see that in the events because it's just noise, and we don't need to clog up the systems. And so that's India. Tell me, is that international super scanners? How do you identify those guys?
These are IPs outside of the US and Canada that have attempted to connect to 5,000 or more distinct ports across access enforcers of multiple partners. So yeah, they're just generating a lot of noise.
And the value of that is we take those scanners and we flag them. We know they're out there. We drop it. We don't ingest that data. We keep the system clean and efficient, and we minimize the processing on your network. And that's we think a really important part in reducing the noise. The suspicious US IPs, we have a few sites that are able to block all traffic inbound. So that helps us pick up those domestic IPs that are engaged in that kind of scanning and probing. If you'll note the sort of introduction of the feeds, like the Log4j, you see it go down and up. We'll talk about that more specifically. But as we tune these feeds, the IPs do fall off. We don't keep them forever, but if they're active, we keep them on the feed. Got a question here from Mike. Great question about Shodan, which is a great resource. Lawrence, how do you handle Shodan? Is that in our known scanner bucket?
Not quite yet. Like we're still working on a known scanners bucket. But things like Shodan and the rest of the scanners, like there's quite a few. For example, Binary Edge, Alpha Strike, Census, Rapid7, Stretchoid. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these scanners that basically create a lot of noise in the feeds, and that is something I'm currently working on to basically just sinkhole them basically and make them disappear.
Great, that's a great question, Mike. So one practical implication for that is if you guys have sites that you're doing scanning, you may well need to whitelist the source of that IP as an authorized scanner, which frankly is best practice. So the public information that Shodan puts out there, while it's great and it's neat and all, it does make you a target, right? If they know you've got RDP exposed, then all somebody has to do is go search RDP at Shodan, and they've got a target list. So we think, if you're going to do scanning, it should be permitted and known, as opposed to just being a victim there. So if there are any other questions on these feeds, I'd be happy to answer as we go. We also have external threat feeds, and Lawrence, I want to revisit your comment about corrupting data or threat feeds, right? You guys have been careful in choosing these feeds because it is a way that could create problems for guys, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like false positives create a lot of work. So we try to carefully curate and select feeds and rules that generate those feeds, just to choose those that are that we have high confidence that they will produce true positives. But we don't always, I mean, it's not a perfect science, because sometimes we look at a rule that's used and we're like, okay, this is a really specific rule, it should work. And yeah, it should, capture the bad data. But there are times as well that, it just so happens that certain legit software out there happens to generate the same type of traffic, then we have to work around that traffic.
But we have to be careful about what we put on the list, because in taking external threat feeds that can be helpful. On the one hand, those lists have to be vetted, and they're typically not static. So you're introducing a dynamic flow of data into your threat feeds. Second, there is a limitation on the feeds that we can take and the numbers, and there's a balance of putting our threat data first, which is more relevant, more correlated to the attacks you guys are seeing, versus CrowdStrike's threat data, which frankly we've run tests against it, and they pick up about 3% of our data. And so it's really you want to use our technical resources to handle the ones that are most threatening. So we'll pivot now to the Log4j situation. And Lawrence, I'm going to get you just to walk through, I think most folks know what it is, a vulnerability with the Apache. I'm blanking.
It's okay. It's a Java, basically a Java logging library.
Yeah. Walk us through the background real quick, and then what you guys did immediately and how this impacted the Community Shield.
Sure. So the Log4j is a Java logging library, an open source one that is widely used by a lot of different products, hardware and software alike. And I mean, and if you think about it, like logging, like what could go wrong with logging, right? You're just writing strings, text to a file, that's it. But some time ago, like many years ago, someone requested a feature to be able to expand basically certain like patterns in the log. For example, if you insert a certain pattern, when you log a certain pattern, then they'll run some code to like log like a username or some other kinds of meta information in there. So it sounded like a cool feature, and then so it was implemented. But then so researchers found that could actually be used to run basically arbitrary code, depending on the privileges of the application that uses Log4j, so it can run in the context of that application. Because it's so prevalent, and because it's used for logging, attackers could, they could basically send their payloads in like HTTP traffic, HTTPS traffic, mail, and they could shove it into the user agent headers of web requests, or shove it in a MIME type, shove it in, basically anywhere, anything that can be logged. So what the payload does is that they can make the affected system do a callback to them, and from there they can establish basically they can run anything, right? But one of the common things they could do is to establish a command and control channel to the affected system. So basically, it was around December 9th that the Log4j vulnerability was announced. And then, of course, it was almost right before the weekend, and that made quite a number of people upset. And then in terms of what we did, on the very next day, on Friday, we gathered the IPs that were found by Gray Noise that they published, and then we propagated that to all the access enforcers, which received them on Friday night. On Monday, we added more IPs. I believe it was from Microsoft. And in the same week, we started monitoring the alerts from the Proofpoint emerging threats rules that are active on all access enforcers. And from there, we created our own feed. When I first ran a comparison of the IPs against the ones from Microsoft and Gray Noise, on that first day that I ran it, I think that we had 200 unique IPs. And then the next week, I ran it again, and we had 700 IPs. They were unique to our community. And then I believe we're close to 1,000 now, if I'm not mistaken. So we definitely have some unique data that the big companies are not seeing.
And what that is, Lawrence, is the IDS IPS system with Proofpoint updated the emerging threat rule set to detect Log4j in a variety of different ways, right? And then we're basically pulling those events from systems triggering the IDS IPS rules.
Yeah, that's correct. On the very first week, Proofpoint created just a handful of IDS IPS rules that look for these types of payloads. But as the threat actors became, as they found more ways to obfuscate the traffic, so Proofpoint published more rules. And there's also some rules in there for ransomware systems that are based on Log4j. So as they expanded the rule set, so that gave us the opportunity to gather more data as well. So, and then, this list of IPs that we gather is then repropagated out to our own community of access enforcers, so that any attempt against one access enforcer, like any IPs that try to attack one, that IP will be blocked for all access enforcers. So that's how we leverage information sharing across our fleet.
So what you see here on the screen are some of the IDS IPS rules that are geared towards the Log4j attempts, and you'll see they cross over quite a variety. I think one of the engineers was telling us that there's over about 103 unique rules that include attack response rules, exploit rules, informational rules, Trojan, but different types and categories. And in India, you've had to tune that a little bit, right?
Yes, we've had to remove a couple of rules that were a little too broad and aggressive in getting IPs.
And how do you figure that out? I mean, when you come in the morning and you're looking over the data, something must jump out at you that triggers you to, hey, I need to look into this. How are you actually going about tuning what rules that we're pulling in from the feed?
One way is I have alerts that go at every couple hours that send me potential false positives. So if there are any IPs that are generating a usually high number of alerts, I'll look at that to investigate whether it's a false positive or not. If it is, we'll see what added that IP to the feed. And if it's a rule like the ones you mentioned earlier, then we'll remove it and that'll help make the feed better.
Right. So it really is a recipe, and it's a refinement, and it's a process, and we're doing that behind the scenes for you guys. I think, Lawrence, there were a couple of lessons that you and we talked about that we learned. And, I want to bring up a few. I think, one, I want to recognize what you guys did, how fast you did it, how effectively, and the data speaks for itself in terms of the expanded protection. But you said, gee, it sure would have been nice to have the API released. Why is that? What would you have done if the API had been there?
Yeah, basically, like right now, we're repropagating these IPs on a nightly basis. So what I would like eventually to get to is to propagate it within minutes of something being identified. So that is something that having an API, basically if we extend our API engine that's on every exenforcer to be able to facilitate that, we should be able to achieve that. So that's definitely one lesson learned here.
So the good news is that's part of the plan, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like that is coming. Yeah, that is coming. We are working on it as we speak.
So it's not pie in the sky, but it is not ready yet for production time. But another thing that we learned was that the collection of intel, there's some data we could get, but it was really hard. Tell me about that, Lawrence. I mean, the strings that I talked to a friend who's over in the security environment and he was interested, and he asked for some type of data that was, remember that, Lawrence?
Yeah, so like another thing that is tricky here is that basically we have thousands and thousands of units that are collecting all this data, but what we are seeing right now is the end result, which is the alert from the rule. What we cannot yet capture, well, we can, but it's tricky. We cannot get the actual payload that is being sent by the attacker. Like it is being logged in the boxes, but there was no easy way anyway for us to query them to get the payloads for further analysis. So that is also, if we had an API endpoint that allows us to do that, that would definitely be allow us to do even further analysis.
So this is part of learning, like what we built and what we need to add. And, it's basically, we got the inbound attempt, and we have access to the data that's, sort of the outbound callback, which may or may not be the same infrastructure that they came in from. But we need to implement a way to get that quick and easy. And that will only expand what we can do, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because in the case of the Log4j payload, when it comes in, like I said earlier, it has to be able to call back. And within the payload is the IP address or the host name that is telling the Log4j library to call back to. So in some cases, where that payload is sent from and where it is once the connection, the reverse shell connection to come back to is the same IP. In other cases, it's not the same. So, so what we can definitely see is where it's coming from, but because without actual access to the payload, it's not as easy to see where they intend to connect back to. So, yeah, having further access through the API would definitely help there.
Somebody asked a question, which is a really good one, and it's what about encrypted traffic, Lawrence? What are the limits there?
Yeah, so with encrypted traffic, unfortunately, being encrypted by definition means it's, you cannot see inside. Yeah, so we can only see what we can see. So there are, like, at least for outbound traffic, there are certain ways that we can use to work around that. But we're currently researching that.
It is definitely a challenge, and it's one aspect of sort of a blind spot. One place that is detectable is at the application level and at the host level, right, where the encryption terminates, and kind of understanding the impact. It'd be great to be able to do it. It does have significant resource issues from a cost and resource standpoint. So we are looking at ways. It's not an immediate, but that's a lesson learned. But we'll see how knowing what we know can extend to help cover threats from encrypted platforms. So I'll show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce over. We're going to look at dashboards. Two are public on the Log4j. Dashboard I want to show is the dashboard that sources the IPs, if you will. So this dashboard is built to reflect. It's built. India has done a phenomenal job putting this together, and it's built using Power BI. We aggregate the data, we roll it up, and India, how often is this updated?
So this data is updated hourly. So every hour, the data is pushed to Power BI and updated in the dashboard.
So on this one, you'll see this shows all data by default. This shows it by the most recent 36 hours. And the total unique number of IPs that we've detected a Log4j event and the total number of events. So like the public dashboard is filterable. So you can see they're mostly coming from the US. About a fourth of the IPs. And in terms of events, DigitalOcean is a big source of them, 111 IPs. And those are the ports that we're picking up those up on. We actually picked some up on 443, so that must be unencrypted traffic, right, Lawrence?
Yeah, that one is interesting. My guess is there's probably like a Log4j payload within like even with HTTPS, like there's a negotiation process before things become fully encrypted. So it could be that maybe an attacker is like putting some Log4j payload in the initial negotiation phase before it enters that. But yeah, but we do not know for sure because we do not, we need to grab that actual payload to analyze.
So then this shows from Russia. I don't know if anybody has any other interest of like where so not a lot of IPs, but a few. And India created the same, so we can migrate over and look at this on a day by day. So this shows to me since the early December, the number of unique IPs that were being flagged, it was pretty high, right? So in the beginning, that's when we were seeing the most. Let's see if the 203 IPs on the 14th, up to 3 set, and then it dropped off, right? There was a spike here, a spike up here, but to me, it sort of shows the long tail of the activity. Additionally, a couple other things to note. are the ports that we do see this on, and as we already mentioned, most of it's unencrypted traffic in terms of the initial detection. And then also want to note, well-known infrastructure providers are included in this, right? Amazon, DigitalOcean, right? Remember these numbers: 381 for DigitalOcean, Amazon 30. And when you go look at it on an expanded basis, this shows, you could look at a first IP and look at the most recent data points. So these IPs coming in on the active today, so forth. So this is the source feed, again, of the threat feed. And you'll notice here the numbers 1,540. The next thing I want to show is bounce over to the actual public dashboard here to show the actual threat feed size. So the threat feed size is what's currently active. So there are currently 709 IPs that came from us. Now that's a lot lower than the 1,500. India, what we triaged, right, early on, a bunch.
Yes, and we moved a couple of duplicates that were also in the external threat feed.
So you'll notice that, you know, we did cut it way down, but we're trying to get to the unique feed. And so now, you know, this is gradually growing in terms of the infrastructure here that's being detected and used. So this is the actual feed size. The next thing is then comparing that to the actual Community Shield dashboard. And this shows events from the threat feed across all ports. And what you'll notice is that by using the threat feed generated mostly from unencrypted traffic, we're able to extend that to protect against activity on those encrypted ports, like 443. So I want to show a couple things that jumped out to me when I looked at the data. The couple things was looking at the different types of the infrastructure. So Alpha Strike is the research scanner that Lawrence mentioned. And so they've got a vast number of IP addresses they're using and scanning against all kinds of ports. And if you look at most recently, it's like, well, what do they look at today? Oh, we hadn't picked them up today. Well, yesterday, what did they look at? Well, they were looking at 25 and 21. Lawrence, does that mean anything to you that they're not looking at the same port every day?
Yeah, so like 25 is SMTP, 21 is FTP. So I think what they're doing here, because since Log4j is so prevalent in all kinds of applications, so as Alpha Strike is, I think they're creating like protocol specific scanners, and as they develop one for SMTP, then they scan SMTP. Then as they develop one for FTP, then they scan FTP the next day, and so on and so forth. Like I saw 161 there as well as SNMP. So I think the Alpha Strike has been doing this for like since you know, December, and creating a lot of noise.
It's creating noise, but it's also creating targeted noise, which is suggestive of newly identified vulnerabilities, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it could be that they're just trying, I mean, yeah, perhaps. Like one thing the Log4j scanners and threat actors and researchers do is that they create this payloads and they just stuff it into anywhere that they can find. And then they watch their, you know, their collector to see if anything tries to connect back. So yeah, it may be indicative of a new Log4j based vulnerable product that they found, or it could just be, you know, random stuffing of payloads just to see if anything connects back in an attempt to identify such vulnerabilities.
So that's one category of sort of infrastructure we saw here. This was another one that I found interesting, was this Comcast. And we all know Comcast is generally a SMB, commercial or consumer infrastructure. And so this one IP generated an enormous amount of activity. And I believe it's an IP that had a system that was probably a victim itself, and it was compromised and being used to probe other places. So that's a different type. Not all infrastructure that's coming at you is owned by the bad guy. It might be pwned by the bad guy, right? And then in other cases, it might be leased by the bad guy. So remember, I asked you to remember that number of IPs for DigitalOcean that were flagged. So that was 300 and something were flagged, and 232 of those have been blocked, which is, about 2/3. Recognizing that the feed delay to go from detection to the feed is anywhere from a couple hours to 24 hours, depending on the on when we first detect it. And so you look at DigitalOcean, we're seeing a lot of activity from their infrastructure. Let's check Amazon. So if you look at Amazon, there were about 30 IPs from Amazon, but we've only seen one active on the feed. So either the bad guys only use it for less than a day, or we believe, and our internal folks are pretty confident, Amazon's engaged in a lot more active policing. So that's the kind of, their insights here. Again, there's the ports, what they're targeting, where they're coming from. If you look at DigitalOcean, DigitalOcean operates infrastructure across the world. If you look at, I'm going to flip now back to an internal dashboard that shows a little bit more. We have an internal one that shows the same data overview at the big level, right? But then we also created a page where we can look more specifically at the first scene, last scene. And so investigating, and we can also split it by feed. So if we split if we sort alphabetically and we look at the Amazon, again, first detected, last detected same day, wasn't active very long. If we look at the DigitalOcean, where that's coming from, you could see that their infrastructure is stuff being used today that was used on the 16th. So they're not policing their stuff, we don't believe. And so it just gives you some more insights into what's coming at you. So any questions or thoughts, insights, we welcome them. But this is real data, and it's in terms of most recent threats, this is what's happening. It is important to note that the threat feed activity represents a blocked traffic event from an IP that was detected by the Log4j recipe. That's all we know. We don't know, were they trying to leverage Log4j? Maybe they were doing something else. Maybe they were trying to do a brute force. But it is, where they came from and why they're on the feed. But that's all we know, and it's important to not overstate that. And then I want to update briefly on the alerts. So, India, how many malicious traffic notifications are you guys sending out on a daily basis?
Usually sending out at least one, but it could be anywhere between 1 to 6 or 7 per day.
And so you'd only get it if you have one, right? You don't send it to everybody.
Correct.
Gotcha. And in terms of the triggers, what is sort of the recipe for? You've got a couple of different recipes. Which are the ones that jump to mind for when you notify somebody?
So we have 3 different triggers, and one we deployed relatively recently. One is at least one device that has had outbound activity to an IP that's in the CNC RIFE or any C2 external threat feed. And these contain IPs that are very likely to be malicious. Second trigger is at least one device that has made greater than 10 attempts to connect to an IP with an abused IPv4 abuse confidence score of 100. And a score of 100 in this case is a strong indicator of at least a suspicious, so likely malicious IP. And the newest trigger is an excessive amount of international outbound alerts. And this is currently classified as with a device that generates more than 250 outbound alerts involving at least one international IP.
That's cool. And so, and this happens on what frequency do these run?
We run these every morning at 3 o'clock, and that gets data for the previous day.
And if somebody were going to get one, they could expect to get it sort of anywhere from 7 a.m. to what, noon Eastern time?
So they're sent out at 11 o'clock every morning.
Okay. And there's some manual review in there, and we're putting effort to alert you guys on these things. You need to look at it, because what is some of the stuff you found for folks, India?
Just referring to the IPs and ports and supplemental info, and in some cases reviewing packet captures. We've been able to detect crypto miners, crackbot infections, trickbot infections, Tor and BitTorrent clients that may or may not be authorized on the network, and other software making suspicious outbound connections.
So again, Quackbot, TrickBot, those can cause ransomware, right?
Yes, and they exfiltrate data.
Yeah. So
stored in browsers.
So I think it's really important that you guys investigate these if you get them. We are happy to help. India wants to help. We can't do it all alone. The email comes from Community Shield at Calyptix, is that right? Somebody was asking what email would these come from?
Yeah, I think it comes from Community Shield at calyptix.com.
Right. And you can respond to that email to a number of us, and we'll step in and give feedback and help. So there are a couple of pieces to these reports. One is the internal source IP, the threat feed that's triggering why it matters, where it's going, what destination IP, what destination port, what protocol, who the infrastructure provider is, the ASN organization, what country it's going to, when we first saw it, last saw it, the duration in hours and the number of times. And then there's a second page that provides some aggregated threat intel, and you're pulling information from a couple of sources, right, India, that help give somebody some insight there?
Yes, we pull data from Abuse IPDB, Alien Vault, and Pulse Dive.
So if those threat intel resources have information on those IPs, the report includes that for you. Just because there's nothing there doesn't mean it's not bad. Go back to why it might be on the alert. It might be somebody that's trying to get into an RDP system somewhere. And now you've got a customer that's got traffic going back to that same IP address. So remember that kill chain. What we're doing is we're stopping that traffic at a later stage in the process. We think they've gotten into your network. We're trying to stop them from getting out. That's either to complete the malware formation or complete, action on objective or command and control beaconing. Those events are meaningful, and it's probably not covered in your typical MSP. I think it's fair to call this managed detection and response. We're just doing it for you as part of what we're building. I'm not going to say it's the same as everybody else is doing. I don't have their recipe, but this is correlated threat intel from our client sites. And so, I would take it very serious. We have flagged some for folks, and they tend not to investigate it. And maybe they can't bring it up with the end customer. Maybe they're not under contract. We need some feedback on how do we help make this an easy process to get your clients to want to look at it. You need to capture the packets. You need to look at the logs. You need to look at where that device is on the subnet. We've got cameras that are coming from China that are calling back out to China. Are they supposed to? Maybe, maybe not. You need to look at those things. So again, we're happy. We want to do this. It's included in what we're doing. If there are sites that continue to go unresolved, we will have to discontinue the service for those sites because the processing and the data gets intensive on our end. So, you know, we do want you to investigate. We look forward to more feedback. In terms of roadmap, Lawrence, version 5.03 brought these pieces: Community Shield, the external threat feed, LDAP for gatekeeper, and the graceful shutdown so you can connect it to your UPS. Let's talk about where we're going, both near term and long term.
So in the next version, we're going to call it version 6.0. The big thing there would be we're going to enable multi-factor authentication across the GUI, as in the Access Enforcer's web console, and the SSH service, as well as Calyptix VPN. For Calyptix VPN, there'll be integration with Duo as well. And then we're going to support new models, namely the AE800. And as Ben mentioned earlier, you know, it'll support basically Gatekeeper, the basic and premium plans, where you have the basic plan for free and the premium plan, which is additional subscription. And then in the future, we're doing a lot of stress testing on threat feeds. Like obviously the Access Enforcer itself has limited computational resources. So we want to optimize whatever we can when we load these feeds into the systems. That said, we believe that the number of IPs that we can host, and then, like, you know, as Ben mentioned, 30,000 plus. I mean, that is way more than many of the other devices that we know of. Yeah, so we're going to continue expanding the threat feeds and enhance the scanner detection to reduce the noise from Shodan, Binary Edge, Alpha Strike, and so forth. And you know, accelerate the feed generation distribution so that you guys can get the threat intel and block the threat actors as fast as possible. My goal is minutes within detection. Yeah, trying to, that's been my dream of mine for a long time, so I do want to get there. And then, yeah, finally a cloud management console to manage everything.
So there's a lot here, and it's been working in parallel. I do want to, on the feed generation, there's sort of two aspects. I mean, there's how fast we can generate the new information, and then also how fast can we put it out there, right? Those are separate pieces you guys are working on.
Yeah, that's right. So like we keep optimizing and refining as we go along. Yeah, so yeah, but the goal is to, yeah, extremely rapid propagation is the end goal.
And in terms of threat feed sizes, I know we've set some pretty high numbers that we think we can push to, but we don't want to, we're not, you know, there will be limits at some point. That's why we're encouraging folks to get the hardware upgrades to boost the memory. But to put in perspective, I ran a query yesterday, and there were 173,000 unique IPs triggering Geo Fence, right? And there were another 30,000 unique IPs that were triggering an SMB firewall traffic rule that have no sense, and they're probing for SMB port. So, I mean, that's 200,000 IPs in a day. I ran a query a while back. I want to say it was in the order of 8 million or so potentially bad IPs. So there's a big number out there, and we want to make sure we can handle a lot of them, and we also do the right ones. Again, I would invite you guys, as you see activity at your sites, if there's stuff that you think would be better than others, you know, this is not rocket science. We just need a recipe that you think would help defend your clients. And the reason is a small business have a different footprint and a different profile than enterprises. So Bank of America can't use the same implementation and configuration options that the dentist and the lawyer and the architects can, right? And so we want to take advantage of that, not only to collect intel, but also to make it actionable. And so we think you guys can help us figure out those recipes. And, you know, there is no bad idea, only the ones that aren't shared. In addition, need you to continue to investigate events and give us feedback on those. Share the results and findings, and implement configurations that drive the data collection. Most specifically, running IDS IPS is really important, using other firewall rules. Any other things? We've got some more. We hit at the end on the config. There's a lot of resources in our portal. There's the public dashboard. Make sure you take a look if you haven't familiarized yourself with Gatekeeper for Zero Trust. Very powerful, and it's included for 5 users. No limit on the number of rules anymore. So you got a user can have a lot of rules. You can have one user connect to all of your client sites. So questions, see if there are any more questions. We've gotten a couple of standard ones we've been putting out here to turn Community Shield. It's on by default. That was a lesson learned with Geo Fence. It's best if it makes sense to turn it on, turn it on. Any additional fee? We don't think that Community Shield merits a fee. It's part of what we're doing as our comprehensive services for you guys, as included with the Event Vault, Connection Monitor, Dynamic DNS, and the external feeds. How about impacting your network setup? We don't think it will. We're carefully tuning the feeds. If you run into something, let us know. Can you override a blocked IP? Absolutely. So for scanning, authorized scanning, just put it on the static whitelist. That's the best way to do it. It's the safest and follows best practices. How is Community Shield updated? We talked about that every night. We're pushing out new feeds. Will it slow you down? We don't think so, but you can upgrade if you need to. What else should you know? Ask questions, learn more about it, check out the dashboards. If there are things in the dashboards you think would be good to add, let us know. In terms of recommendations, first and foremost, make sure you're operating current version. Lawrence, this is an update from yesterday on the versioning of our fleet. And so I'm pretty proud of that. I don't know, but that's 5.03, almost 80% running current version that we do automatically for you guys. You add only 13% are a generation off in terms of OS. So if you're still running 4.1, you don't have Geo Fence, you don't have Community Shield, and you don't have Gatekeeper. You ought to upgrade. Additionally, turn on Geo Fence, a great source of protection. Going back to the dashboard, if you look at where those threats are coming from, activate the IDS to collect more data. Activate the dynamic blacklist is tremendously effective with that. Keep current on the firmware. Gatekeeper is zero trust. It's recommended as a methodology by the NSA, and the government's driving to it. Use your web filtering. Even if you're not blocking, at least monitor. We do recommend you block proxies and you block the malware category. LAN lockdown to isolate subnets, especially when you find your cameras from China going back to China. You don't want those cameras on the same business network. Limit what they can touch. Leverage outbound filtering. Make sure you're blocking SNMP unless you're intending it to go somewhere. Block the 445, the other SMB ports. Implement access control on port forwarding rules and restrict remote management. Those things can significantly change your attack surface. So any other questions? Oh, what's the upgrade model for, or the offer? So for the upgrade offer, it's essentially a no-cost upgrade. If you have a 10-pack, you use one of the units out of your 10-pack plus $99 shipping. And when you return the old 800, we'll give you a $99 credit on your account. So really you end up paying shipping. The 800 is $4 cheaper on a monthly basis than the 900. And so when you think about it, you might as well get the 900 because it's good for a long time. So we'll run this upgrade offer for a limited period. If it's on an annual deal, check with Chris. I think we'll do a rollover for you for your existing subscription and warranty and upgrade to the 900. That 800 hardware is done well. It's a long-lived piece of device, but we'd encourage you again to update. Time frame, Lawrence. You love this question. So I know you have real-time users with MFA in version 6. Realistically, is there any idea on the time frame for rolling that out?
So we're working as fast as we can. So yeah, probably sometime in the next 2 months or so, preferably, hopefully earlier. I like to be conservative when estimating the time, but we are like nearing the finishing line on this one.
Perfect. And so our rollout process again is NFRs first. Then we'll start rolling out to production sites. And if you do have a site that needs MFA beforehand, check with the support team and the sales team, and they can potentially get you in there if you're willing to do that. So if you need it. So we do have a number of folks using it. It's not universal. It's a special ask, but if it's a special need, we'll certainly take it under advisement. So with that, I want to close by first acknowledging the tremendous amount of effort that our team has done, both in building the community shield and the dashboards that you saw. India Thomas is an extraordinarily capable young lady who joined our team about 6 months ago. We're delighted to have her. Tremendous resource and skill set, and a lot of hard work there. And if there are insights you're looking for, if there are questions that we're not answering there, let us know, because you're probably not the only one. Additionally, Lawrence, Bryce, and the other members of the dev team and rolling out the feed for Log4j and the other pieces that they've done, tremendous efforts there. So thank them. And as always, thank our partners who stuck with us for a long time as we continue to work towards building our solution and providing the community shield to protect our small business community. Thank you, guys. Any other questions, let us know. We look forward to the feedback.